happy to have another episode of the podcast, the Future Intelligence, the World in 2050. And I'm happy to have my co-hosts, Dr. Sangeeth Varghese and Dr. Tamas Landesz, both on site. And we are very, very honored to have today Denis Naughten as a guest, who is the chairperson of the Inter-Parliamentary Union Working Group on Science and Technology. And he did so many things, and I'm very specifically keen of speaking about what he's doing now as what he has done. But he has been he has served for cabinet of ministers. He has been a minister. He has served as a pioneer of ideas of putting together technology and science for actually for politics, which is at that moment when he started was really very revolutionary. So we are very happy to have him here, and we are very happy to speak with him about not the previous life, but about the future, what is expecting us. And thank you, Denis, for joining us. And I hope we may just speak with names. Is that okay?
That's perfect, Karine, with me.
Okay. We have some ideas of future which are with us today, yesterday, tomorrow. And, you know, as a chairperson of the Inter-Parliamentary Union working with science and technology in the actually politics and in the international politics, you see exactly the moment where the ethics is coming together with many question marks, because we have incredible technology nowadays, and we have many concerns with those technologies at the implementation moment. So can you describe the idea behind the initiative as a chairperson, why you started to think about this Inter-Parliamentary Union working on that, and how you think that you can support our better future with that?
Well, I think, look, first of all, maybe to set a bit of a context, particularly in the format of the podcast that you're looking at. And I suppose, look, we're in a society today where we have global environmental threats, and they are impacting in every single community across this planet. We've huge geopolitical tensions, and sadly, they seem to be getting worse rather than better. And then you have, combined with all that, the huge technological disruption that we're seeing at the moment. And there's huge anxiety out there, particularly in terms of artificial intelligence and the potential risks, as well as the huge opportunities that are there with it. And at the same time, we see the global structures, whether it be the United Nations, which is really struggling at the moment, the World Trade Organization, which has basically been mothballed as an institution, and many of the other global institutions either being sidelined or becoming ineffective in dealing with some of the global challenges that we have presently. And incorporating all that, then you have very much a drive in many parts of the world for nationalism, that the interests of the country come before regional interests, come before citizen interests, come before global interests. So we're at a junction in society today which is really concerning. And one of the things that we've been trying to look at within our working group, and the working group is made up of 21 members of parliament from across the planet. a mix of men and women, a mix of very different backgrounds, some of them from a scientific background, some of them from a humanities background, some of them without any third level formal education at all, but all of whom believe that there is a need to have a stronger relationship between the scientific and technological community and the whole parliamentary process. And one of the things that we've been trying to grapple with is how do we, in this new type of society, in this lack of global structures, develop a set of standards for emerging technologies, and not just the technologies that we're dealing with today. So artificial intelligence is the topical one, but like coming very quickly down the road is quantum computing. The impact that is going to have, particularly with artificial intelligence. Human augmentation, there is huge ethical issues in relation to that. And I suppose, look, this week we've seen in the media where a young child has had a limb replaced. But we're going to see human augmentation where you're going to have chips put into people's brains. What impact is that going to have? All right, there are potential positives in terms of people with mental health issues, but how far do you take that? And then there's the global challenges related to the likes of climate change, like geoengineering and the implications of that. So how do we try and put some sort of an ethical or overarching structure in place that can act as a guidance for members of parliament and the scientific community when they're exploring the potential of technology, how far they should push technology, and what should be the red lines in relation to it? So as 21 members of parliament, what we've been doing is drafting up 11 articles, basically focused around the principle of human rights and the UN concept of human security, where you would look at an overarching framework that could be tested against any new technology, not just artificial intelligence today, but new technologies coming down the track. What type of standards, what type of protections do we need to put in place, and what type of opportunities are there, and how do we ensure that those opportunities are shared equitably across the planet?
Thank you. May I ask one small thing to that? Two other technologies that are coming up is biohacking, which you haven't mentioned, and it can become a big thing for us. For instance, many people are trying to work around of their age and enhance longevity in one hand. In other hand, I mean, one should be able to decide if they want to live longer or not, no? Well, we are speaking about protecting people, but I mean, maybe this protection can be too much. I'm sorry, but from all of what you described, I mean, maybe I want to biohack myself and live forever.
Yes, and look, you could add in a lot of different innovations and technologies into this, but what we've tried to do with this ethical charter is to try and be technology neutral in relation to it, and try and provide an overarching structure and framework that you would then put in a set of ethical standards for artificial intelligence, for all of these other issues that are emerging. Naturally enough, every single technology, every single ethical issue will have its own unique circumstances, its own unique challenges that need to be addressed. But the idea behind this charter is that it would be global in terms of its technology perspective, but also global in terms of its application. So it's not coming from the northeastern global community which has been driving science and technology to date. This is something that could easily be applied, in sub-Saharan Africa or in other parts of the world where they may have different types of ethical or cultural standards, whether it be in the Middle East or Asia. And I suppose that's what's unique about this is it's a set of standards that are being drafted by members of parliament that come from very different backgrounds, from different parts of the world, that is trying not to be technology specific in relation to it. And I suppose my own motivation in relation to it is that I was Minister for Communications, Climate Action, Environment in Ireland, also responsible for energy, the digital economy. And on a day-to-day basis, I was dealing with many different challenges where we're trying to regulate new technologies without having any standard or principle that you could test that against. And the objective behind this charter is to be that standard, is to be that principle, not just for members of parliament in drafting regulations and standards, but also helping governments to do that, but also providing a toolkit to the scientific communities to say, look, this is likely where regulators and governments are going to set the red line in relation to your new technology. So this is probably as far as you're really going to be able to go with it. So there's no point going further than that. So we'll act as a guide rail really for the scientific community as well.
Very interesting points, Dr. Naughten. Very interesting points. As you would have noticed, we actually come from 3 different continents. I'm sitting in South Asia, in a city called Bangalore, while Dr. Tamas joins us from Europe, and Dr. Karine joins us from the Americas. And my question is specifically regarding the cross borders, which is the reason why I was giving the introduction about 3 people joining from 3 different, vastly varied time zones and vastly varied continents. So given your comprehensive experience in the intercultural, multinational diplomacy and the science policy part of it, how do you predict the scientific cooperation across the borders will help us in bridging the political divides? So here is technology which is coming in, and here is the policies which are coming in, and how do you really see this as bridging between the political divides? Thank you.
So, look, the audio is after breaking down there, so I will try and answer the question as best I can. If I haven't answered it correctly, please do come back to me. First of all, I don't have a PhD. I have a background in science, but I never actually finished my PhD. But I suppose I have a PhD in life, having spent 28 years in Parliament at this stage. But I think I have found, in terms of being involved in the peace process here in Ireland, having been involved in grappling very challenging political issues within my own parliament and at European level, at Council of Ministers level, and also globally, that, when you're dealing with complex challenges, where you have different perspectives and interests in relation to it, particularly in the global climate that I described at the introduction, I think you need to have some foundation. And I think that foundation is science, where you can agree on the basic set of facts. So take climate change, for example. I think everyone and every government now around the world accepts that our planet is warming, accepts that a human intervention has had a huge impact in terms of the rate of that warming. And while there may be disputes in terms of how you address those challenges, the challenges have been accepted now, and the scientific evidence is to support that. And that in itself, where you can get everyone to agree on a single problem, is an achievement in itself. And I suppose particularly with climate change, and probably one of the frustrating things that I see, and I was the first climate action minister in Ireland setting up the department in Ireland, is that every country has a unique set of problems that they need to deal with in terms of climate change. And science can really help to provide a suite of options and solutions to that. And I think science, in tandem with this concept of human security, where you look at individuals, the impact of change and policy change on them, how you can engage with them and bring them on that process with you, and look at solving individual problems, but community problems, as well as country problems, and then sharing that knowledge with other countries. And I think probably this is one of the big weaknesses in relation to science, is that science, as I say, has been very much developed by the global Northeast, and it has set the standards for the rest of the world. And you know, in terms of open science, that idea of sharing knowledge is in theory there, but not there in practice. So how do we make that happen in practice? And I think, you know, changing that cultural approach is critically important. Sharing technological solutions and being able to adapt those technological solutions to unique circumstances in countries. And apologies now, that's one of the parliamentary bells going here. So if you want to pause for a minute until this stops, it should stop in a couple of minutes, but it's going to interfere here, and there's nothing I can do about it.
You know, we have nothing against having your parliamentary bells in our podcast. It's very authentic.
So apologies for that, but I think you, I think if we can agree the problem and then pool our collective knowledge in coming forward with a suite of solutions. And I suppose this is something I've seen very much in terms of climate change in Ireland. So the problems we have in Ireland are very unique compared to other parts of Europe. So Tamas and the challenges that he has in his country in terms of climate change are very different to the ones in Ireland. However, the problems that we have in Ireland are very similar to the challenges in sub-Saharan Africa. So if we can solve some of these problems in Ireland, we can use some of those tools to help drive the type of change that's needed in sub-Saharan Africa. And what do I mean by that? So in very practical terms, Ireland is quite unique in terms of a lot of our climate emissions are focused on agriculture, which is a big issue in sub-Saharan Africa. A lot of our challenges are involving dispersed rural communities, which is again a big issue in Africa. These are unique circumstances to an Irish situation, and European solutions don't solve our problems in Ireland. But if we can resolve them in Ireland, they can act as a basis for driving some of the technological changes that are needed in other parts of the world. And it's about sharing that understanding, sharing that knowledge, but also listening. And I think that's one of the things that should be a critical part of politics, and sadly is becoming less and less so, where ideology is becoming more important than listening. And sadly, it hasn't been a critical part of science to date. And I think this cultural change now in science that we see about citizen science, and about co-creation of evidence, is changing that switch from it being at the bench in white coats and being the preserve of the scientific community to actually engaging with communities, developing joint research initiatives, and citizens being very much part of that development. And I think that cultural shift in science hopefully will help to drive the cultural shift back by politicians and leaders to actually listen to citizens. And I think one of the big, great positive things about artificial intelligence is it now provides us with the tools to engage far more extensively with communities to a far greater extent than we could ever have done before.
Maybe this is a good time to come in. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Sir Naughten. And thanks for your work on this, on anticipating and preparing from a policymaker side, how to best prepare. I'm currently in Geneva, but there's a lot of talk also about how to prepare the world for a planet that is changing due to many induced climate change related risks, and especially in the region where I work now, which is the Western Pacific. There are many small island states, and if we don't do something about this, some of these islands might even disappear. That in the worst case scenario. So, anticipating the developments of the future, what do you think are the most pressing scientific uh, areas where we should concentrate on, especially as policymaker? You're a policymaker, you're trying to find solutions and then scale, as if I understand correctly. If you look forward and try to anticipate, in this, as we like to say, the radars, right? 5, 10, 25 years ahead. How do you think policymakers like yourself could best add value to this process while anticipating future technological developments? Over.
Well, look, we're not very good at foresight and predicting the future. And look, politicians work on 5-year cycles. Anything beyond 5 years is very difficult for us to conceptualize. And I think this is where science can really help us. So we had a particularly complex issue in Ireland in relation to our health service. And this is not foresight, but it'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. And we've had, for the last 20 years, huge debate on how we should restructure and reform our health service. And every new minister and every new government that came in had a new idea and started from scratch again. So what we've done is we actually brought the members of parliament from across all parties together. And we brought members of the scientific community in. And we said, look, how we want to get to a situation where we've universal access to healthcare, where regardless of how much money you have in your pocket, you can get equal access to treatment. And that's where we want to be. Now, how can science help us and use evidence to actually plan that route out to that ultimate goal, rather than taking it from a partisan political perspective? And the difficulty with foresight is that every single party will look at their utopia or their future threat and use that to suit a particular agenda. I think what needs to happen in relation to foresight is that the scientific community needs to reach out to us as leaders, as members of parliament, and say, look, these are the threats. It could be the implications in terms of quantum computing. For me, talking to small island states at the moment, and my colleagues there, probably the single biggest concern they have at the moment is geoengineering. If big countries geoengineer so that they increase the rainfalls in their particular countries, what implications has that in terms of the climate in many of these small island states? Is this going to have a much bigger impact in terms of rainfall, in terms of rain cycles and everything? And I think if science can predict where we're likely to be in 20 years' time, and look, there's a certain amount of guesswork involved in that, and identify the potential threats that are there at that stage, or the potential opportunities that are there at that stage, then they can sit down with us and say, look, this is where we need to get to, or what we need to avoid in the future. Now, how do we work back from that? How do we put the standards and legislation in place today? How do we develop the engagement with the scientific community now to ensure that that does happen or doesn't happen? To me, I think probably the single biggest threat is, I think, from a global security point of view, is probably geoengineering, because we have countries with very deep pockets that can do this on their own, that can geoengineer off their coast so that it doesn't have a fallout or implications on their territorial lands, but could have huge implications for other countries. How does that impact in terms of stability in countries? For example, if you've reduced rainfall, you've increased famine, that leads to political instability that could spill over borders. I think from an ethical point of view, I think the single biggest challenge for us as members of parliament is human augmentation, not just in terms of where do we draw the line with new potential technologies, but how do we provide access to that in parts of the world where people cannot afford that technology? Do we make it available to them? Or should those people be left behind? So there are massive ethical issues in relation to that as well.
Thank you very much. I mean, on the point of human augmentation, I'm getting all the time very alerted because I myself have over 90 pieces of metal in my body. And all my skull is from metal, from titanium, with several pieces and here and so on. So if I hear that, I'm already augmented, so, and I'm very happy that this science exists. Otherwise, I would not live and I would not speak with you. And last time we met, it was at Geneva Science Diplomacy Week. And you gave a short talk about science diplomacy and how it should care the innovation. And it was short, it was very inspiring, but I want to, catch you on a point. Can you bring some exact examples that science diplomacy worked towards our better future? And if I say our, it's our planet, all of us.
Yeah, so look, this concept of science diplomacy is only something that is really emerging at the moment. I've been involved in it in two aspects. One, in terms of the peace process in our island, and our small island in northwestern Europe is an island that has had conflict for 50 years. We've seen 3,500 people murdered over those 50 years. People shot on the streets, bombs and everything that have gone off. And we have today a fragile peace. And science has been instrumental in building relationships across communities on the island and across the governments, the two governments on the island as well. On the other side of it, then, I've been involved at international level with this concept, working with CERN on this idea of science for peace schools, where we brought together parliamentarians from the Middle East, parliamentarians from the Sahel region in West Africa, and parliamentarians from Southeast Asia around the Mekong River basin there. Parliamentarians whose countries have been in historic conflict, where there is concerns over access to resources, and the initial stage of the work that we've been doing has been focused on the issue of water and sharing water resources. And what we've done is we've brought the members of parliament, we've brought the scientists and technological experts, along with NGOs together into the one room. We brought members of parliament together with these experts for 3 days in Vietnam. We've brought the parliamentary staff together with these experts for 5 days in CERN. And we've looked at leaving politics outside the door, looking at the problems themselves, and looking to see how not just science can help to solve these problems, but scientific method can be used to build engagements between individuals who would represent parliaments and countries that, I say, have been historically in conflict. And one of the key recommendations that has come out of that engagement is making data freely available. Data, we were specifically focused on water, but making water data, so water extraction, rainfall flows, river flows, the amount of water has been taken out for irrigation and so forth. So there's a level of transparency there. Making that data available to the scientific community so that they could work using that data, using global geodata that they would have as well, and satellite data that could be applied to particular regions, and engaging with communities on the ground on how they could better manage those resources, getting them to understand the impacts of extraction of those resources, and also then trying to put regional regulatory structures in place so that, there's an acceptance that, look, everyone needs to get their fair share of that water, but it needs to be done on an equitable basis. And we have at global level, through the Science for Peace schools, set down now a set of guidelines and principles that we can build on in these communities. The difficulty is, particularly if you take the Sahel region in West Africa, we don't even have, stable governments there. Like it's now known as the coup belt because we're having coup d'etats on a regular basis there. But there is at least engagement now taking place between members of parliament there. We had done some work in the Middle East, particularly around Palestine. But sadly, look, things have deteriorated in the last number of months there. But it is a process that's ongoing. And as I say, that's a global level. We've been doing this for the last 20 years, 25 years in Ireland as part of our peace process. Because between the two governments on our island and the governments across our islands between Ireland and Britain, there has been a lack of trust. There has been a lack of acceptance, maybe of legitimacy in some circumstances. And how do we get people to work together? How do we get governments to work together? How do we get communities to work together? So what we've done is we as governments have commissioned independent pieces of research. So on the island of Ireland, we commissioned a piece of research on air quality. So my counterpart, the Environment Minister in Northern Ireland, along with my own department, commissioned a piece of research on improving air quality. We found that 6 people a day on our island of some 7 million people are dying as a result of poor air quality. And that research now has forced both governments to implement practical legislation to improve air quality on our island, which will have an impact with many, many citizens, regardless of which jurisdiction they live in. We've also been looking with the British government and the regional parliaments on our 2 islands at the issue of energy security. Because we're on the periphery of Europe, because we're at the end of a very long gas pipeline, what measures can we take to improve energy security across all of our islands? So again, we've commissioned research on that has made recommendations and policy options for members of parliament and governments to implement. So at an intergovernmental level, we've used science as a way of facilitating engagement, of getting the politicians to sit down around the one table to look at problems and look at joint initiatives to address those problems. But we've also done it at community level because, and we've used water as a good example, a lead in relation to this as well. Because on our island, we have a notional border, a line on a map, and you have communities. One community doesn't recognise the legitimacy or jurisdiction of the government. Some of them don't recognise the legitimacy of their neighbours to even reside there. So in such a circumstance, no matter how good the legislation is on protecting water quality, if people don't respect authority, they're not going to implement those standards or those rules on the ground. So what we've done is we've worked with communities on specific water basins which don't respect jurisdictional boundaries, but looked at it from a water basin point of view. How do we protect the water sources, groundwater and surface water sources? We've worked with school children, with farmers and local communities to identify the problems, source problems in relation to pollution, explain to them the implications of that, the impact that that's having on their water quality and on their drinking water, and got the communities themselves to work to take measures to protect their own water sources and to police those water standards. And it's seen the standard of water quality improve. We've also seen now school children working together, analysing water standards of their own local river, where their grandparents were shooting each other. And that type of cultural change has been brought about by leaving politics to a side, leaving religion to a side, and just purely focusing on science.
I love that future. I really love that future. Coming myself from a part of a world where persistent conflict exists, I really love that future. Thank you for that picture.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, climate change is probably the unique challenge that we all have. And it is a difficult challenge, but it's one that's universal. So no matter if you're living in sub-Saharan Africa, you're living in North America, in Asia, or in Europe, all of us are dealing with that. So we have a unique, unifying problem. So how can we use science now in a very practical level to provide solutions? Because what we've seen to date is, yes, the global scientific community have come together. They're very good at telling us what the problem is and what we need to do globally to resolve that. But they have been very poor in actually coming forward with practical options at country and community level to change that. And I think the one thing that citizen science can do is bring the scientists together with the communities to look at the problems, but look at practical solutions to address that. And I think it's not just bringing science and citizens together. I think it's about a three-way process of bringing science, citizens, and their representatives, the parliamentarians, together, so that you have not just practical solutions, but the parliamentarians then being able to go into Parliament to change the rules, to change the law, to change the standards, to facilitate this happening as well. And to do that not just at a community level and at a national level, but then taking those solutions to other parts of the world, to share those solutions with the parliamentary community and the scientific community in other areas, in other regions, and across regions, so that you have that ripple effect.
Yeah, should I then maybe ask the one of the last questions? There's you mentioned before that the technology is rapidly changing the way we live our world, and also you touched on human augmentation. My question is about how that will impact the labor market, and what can policymakers do to ensure that this new technological development don't result in a worst world, but rather AI for good, as we often hear it from policymakers. What do you think people like you can do in this direction? Oh.
So I think we need to look at a broader concept than just the threat of a particular technology. And look, we're very good at all of us at looking at a potential threat today. But the reality is that we needed to act to address this threat of artificial intelligence 5, 10, 15 years ago. If we're going to really have an impact today in terms of today's workforce or tomorrow's workforce, because these were the people that were in school 10, 15 years ago that are now going to be impacted by this. So how do we change society that we focus on wellness, that we focus on the ability to be able to adapt, that we focus on the skills that are needed for resilience? And I think it comes back to our education system in particular. How do we try and design an education system right from the youngest children right through to our third level institutions that are not training people for a particular job, but are giving people a set of tools and skills that they can do many jobs and that they can adapt to change as it happens. And the reality is change is going to happen far quicker into the future than it ever happened before. Like this idea of training someone to be a doctor or a dentist or a solicitor or an engineer, they are last century concepts. Like, the reality is, to deal with challenges like climate change, to deal with challenges like artificial intelligence, it will require a broad set of skills and people to be able to interact with each other. And probably the single biggest challenge we have today is this thing, a smartphone, because we're losing the ability to talk and engage with each other. And it's probably the single most important skill that we need to instill in our young generation, to be able to have a conversation with someone and to be able to actively listen to them. Sadly, I think we're losing it in politics today because it's all now about ideology. It's not about listening to people. And in fact, we're in the middle of elections here in Ireland for the European Parliament, and I was out canvassing on doors during the week, and I've already decided that I'm not contesting the next parliamentary elections here in Ireland. And a constituent of mine said to me, "Oh, we really need you in Parliament." And I said, "Well, look, I spent 28 years in Parliament. It's time to give someone else a chance." But he said, "The difference is you're very different from the politicians today, because you're a politician that listens rather than talks." And sadly, that is a skill that's missing in politics today. And I think it's a skill that we're losing in society as a whole. A lot of us now actually listen to people, and we're actually preparing our response to what they're saying. So we're actually listening to respond rather than listening to learn. And I've always found it very interesting, not just listening to people and what they're saying, but why they're saying it. What's the underlying motivation behind that? Why do they have that particular perspective and view on things? And I think that's something, I suppose, that inquisitive side to me is something that was instilled in me from training as a scientist. And I think we need more of that type of inquisitive approach from society as a whole, to instill that in young people, that they want to listen to people, to learn their perspective. And I think if we can listen to people, to hear and understand them, I think our countries and our planet will be a much better place. I think there'll be less risk of conflict. I think it will drive far more innovation, because people will listen to individuals and see, how can I incorporate that into a solution, whether it's to climate change, whether it's in relation to the threats of artificial intelligence, human augmentation, whatever the case may be. And I think giving young people today that ability and skill to listen, to actively listen, to build that resilience within them, that ability to adapt and change. I think that's what we really need to be doing, and we need to be instilling that within our education system. And look, the education system in Ireland isn't any different than many parts of the world. Historically, our education system has been far slower at changing than many other aspects of society. But I think those are the types of skills that we need to drive into the future, rather than academic ability, in any particular subject.
Excellent, thank you. So in our part of the world, how we show our respect to somebody is, how we acknowledge the great work which they are doing is by prefixing their name with a doctor. So Dr. Naughten it is.
Thanks very much. No, I really enjoyed this discussion, and I suppose it's taken me out of my comfort zone in terms of, and politics is very much about dealing with the here and now. But I think one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is this idea of committees of the future that are being established in parliaments now, that are getting members of parliament to look at this issue of foresight. And I think foresight and looking to the future and future generations, and the decisions we take today, what are the long-term implications of that, and then working back from there. And I think the parliamentarians are good and politicians are good at working back from the long term to the short term, but sometimes we're not able to look and see what is the long term, what is the long term implications of this. And I think this concept that's being developed in parliaments now of a committee of the future, of looking from an intergenerational aspect of what are the implications of the policy changes that we make today, I think is something that gives me a lot of confidence that we can begin to preempt some of the challenges, rather than look, in an analog perspective in terms of problems. We need to look in a quantum perspective in relation to problems.
Absolutely agree. Two small comments on. First, that it was out of your comfort zone. You shouldn't have expected, because I invited you. So it was implicated that it will be out of comfort zone.
Thanks, Karine. Thank you.
But it was a very great discussion. Thank you very much. And we really like the future that you pictured. And we are happy to work on it. And I mean, we have had a TED Talk together with three, and Sangeeth was speaking about education, and he compared that with frontal assembly line preparation of people. And as you spoke about that education is always back, I remembered that, I just recalled that moment, how he was so emotional about why we prepare our new generation for assembly line. We need to give them quantum polymorphism, that they can do everything. So I hope for that future. We are all very thankful that you found in your very busy schedule some time. And we hope you will stay in Parliament, because we need this kind of people that understand science and diplomacy at once.
And people who would listen. The most important thing, even before politics, even before diplomacy, even before parliament, somebody who would listen to the people, somebody who has got the ears close to the ground.
Yeah, so and look, that is a big problem, and in fact, it's something I've taken for granted throughout my political career, but it's something that within the Inter-Parliamentary Union we're doing at the moment, is this concept of human security. And it's very much about engaging with people at an individual level, rather than at a national or a global level, and trying to problem solve at that level and then scale it up from there, which is sadly becoming less and less common today.
So with this podcast, we try to bring people to listening again. because we are inviting such interesting guests that can bring ideas that people want to listen to. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you, my dears, Tamas, Sangeeth.
All right. Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.